Welcome to a place where love is not simple, where passion is not polite, and where desire is not denied. These are stories born in silence, in stolen glances, in the kind of fire that begins as forbidden and grows into something unshakable. Here, you will hear voices that ache with longing, hearts that surrender to risk, bodies that awaken after years of stillness, and souls that discover a love too deep to destroy. Every story is raw, every word is real, and every moment carries the weight of what it means to truly feel alive. This is not about shallow affection. It is about love that burns, heals, and transforms. If you've ever longed for more, if you've ever felt the ache of desire that cannot be silenced, you are in the right place. What began as a quiet presence in the room was never meant to grow into something dangerous, but it did. At first, it was nothing more than the awareness of being seen. Eyes that lingered too long, not out of rudeness, but out of something softer, something searching. There was no conversation that declared it, no words that named what was happening, only the silence that wrapped itself around every stolen glance. That silence was louder than any confession could ever be. It started with the way the air changed whenever he entered, a stillness, a heaviness, as though the space itself shifted to draw me closer to him. He never said anything that could betray the storm beneath the surface, yet the way his gaze touched me left no doubt. It wasn't childish admiration, nor the fleeting kind of interest that fades when the novelty disappears. It was deeper, more unsettling. It was hunger tied to something tender, and every time our eyes met, I felt myself pulled into it. At first, I told myself it was nothing, that it was only in my imagination, a trick of the mind born out of loneliness or vulnerability. But then came the moments that could no longer be explained away. The way his eyes sought me even in a crowded room, the way his smile softened whenever I laughed, as if he felt it in his own chest, the way silence between us felt full, charged, as though invisible hands were drawing us closer. What terrified me was not his presence, but how my body betrayed me. A simple brush of his arm against mine, accidental, and heat would spread through me like fire catching dry wood. The sound of his voice stirred something that had been dormant for years, reminding me of the part of myself I had buried long ago. Every moment with him whispered of danger, yet that danger felt intoxicating, like stepping too close to the edge of a cliff and feeling the wind pull at you. The secrecy made it sharper. Every glance had to be hidden, every flicker of connection disguised as something innocent. The restraint only deepened the craving. To sit across a table, surrounded by others, and know that only he could hear the quiet storm in my chest. It was unbearable and beautiful all at once. Every second spent pretending nothing was happening only made the truth heavier. He had a way of looking at me that was not loud, not demanding, but steady and unshaken. It said without words that he saw everything, the longing, the hesitation, the fear, and wanted it all. It stripped away the walls I had built over years, walls meant to protect, walls meant to keep me untouched, untouchable. With him, those walls felt fragile, ready to crumble under the weight of a single glance. There were moments I could not breathe, standing too close, our arms brushing while reaching for something on the counter, pretending the contact was nothing. Passing through a doorway at the same time, shoulders grazing, hearts racing. These small collisions meant everything because they carried what could not be spoken aloud. And with each touch, no matter how fleeting, the fire grew. I tried to resist it, tried to tell myself it was wrong, that it was nothing more than temptation. But the truth is, some bonds are not chosen. They are written into the fabric of who we are, igniting when the right person stands too close. And no matter how much I tried to silence it, the pull between us only grew stronger. There was one evening that changed everything. A simple gathering, laughter filling the room, voices rising and falling around us. Yet I was aware of only him, the warmth of his eyes across the table, the subtle tilt of his head when he listened, as though my voice was the only one he heard. When our knees brushed beneath the table, it wasn't an accident, and neither of us moved away. Time slowed, the world fell quiet, and in that single point of contact, the truth between us roared louder than any words could. That night, lying awake, I could still feel it, the press of his knee against mine, the unspoken promise carried in silence. It haunted me, a ghost of touch that refused to fade. I tried to convince myself it was madness, but the truth was clearer than ever. What lived between us was not an illusion. It was real, and it was no longer possible to ignore. The bond had become dangerous, yes, but it was also undeniable. Every glance, every moment of silence, every hidden touch had stitched us together in ways we could not undo. What began as a quiet presence had grown into a fire, and no matter how hard I tried to smother it, the flames only reached higher, burning through the spaces we once thought safe. And in that fire, I realized there was no turning back. Years of loneliness can silence even the most vibrant parts of the soul. Time passes, and the body forgets what it once meant to be touched with tenderness, to be seen with desire, to be wanted beyond words. Longing becomes a quiet ache buried deep, hidden beneath routines, responsibilities, and the steady hum of days that all feel the same. That ache lingers like a shadow, present but ignored, until one moment changes everything. It was in the smallest of gestures that it began, a touch that should have meant nothing, a hand brushing against mine, fingers grazing as if by accident, but the fire it ignited told me it was anything but. It startled me how quickly my body remembered, how suddenly it awoke to a hunger that had been sleeping for years. The warmth spread through me, slow at first, then urgent, pulling me into a place I had thought was long gone. The first time his hand lingered at the small of my back, the world seemed to tilt. It was a touch both sinful and sacred, carrying the weight of everything forbidden and yet everything needed. My breath caught, my heart raced, and for a moment I felt as though the years of silence, the years of untouched skin and restrained longing, collapsed into that single second. His hand was not just a touch, it was an awakening, a reminder that desire was still alive, that passion had only been waiting, patient but fierce, for the right spark. Every time after that was harder to deny. The way he leaned close when he spoke, his voice lowering into something that felt like it was meant only for me. The way his fingertips brushed against mine when passing something as simple as a glass, lingering just long enough to leave me trembling. The ache grew with every touch, and the guilt followed close behind, whispering that this should not be happening. But guilt could not quiet what the body craved. It could not silence the heat that pooled beneath my skin, nor the way my thoughts were consumed by him long after he was gone. One evening, the dam broke. The distance we had fought to maintain slipped away like it had never existed. His lips found mine, and everything I thought I had buried surged to the surface with a force that stole my breath. It was not just a kiss, it was a release, a breaking open, a flood of everything restrained. Years of silence dissolved in that moment, and my body ached with a hunger I could no longer pretend away. The kiss deepened, and with it came the undeniable truth. This was not a fleeting temptation. It was something far more dangerous, far more consuming. His hands traced the lines of my body as though they were discovering a map only he was meant to follow, and every inch of skin burned beneath his touch. The sacred and the sinful blurred together until I could no longer separate them. What was forbidden felt holy in its intensity, and what should have been wrong felt like the purest truth I had ever known. In his arms, the loneliness that had clung to me for years fell away. Every sigh, every moan, every trembling gasp became proof that I was alive again, that desire was not lost but only waiting to be claimed. The heat between us was unbearable. yet it was the kind of heat that nourished, that gave life back to parts of me that had been starved for too long. I was consumed, yes, but it was a consumption that felt like salvation, and with every touch, every whisper, every shiver, the guilt melted into something smaller, something powerless against the tide of need that swept me under. What lived between us was not shame. It was raw, unfiltered passion, carved out of the silence of years and given form in the heat of our bodies pressed together. To be touched like that, to be seen like that, was to remember that love and desire are not separate but intertwined, two sides of the same flame. Even in the quiet aftermath, when breath slowed and the storm settled, the truth lingered in every heartbeat. What had happened was not a mistake. It was not an accident or a lapse of judgment. It was the inevitable breaking open of two souls drawn together, the release of an ache too deep to be ignored any longer. It was passion that burned away fear, burned away shame, and left only the raw, undeniable truth. The body had remembered what it meant to ache, to crave, to be consumed, and once awakened, there was no going back. Every kiss carried risk, and that risk lived in every breath we shared. It was not the kind of love that could exist freely in the open, not the kind of passion that could be worn like a badge without consequence. Every time his lips touched mine, there was the sharp reminder that discovery would shatter everything, that what we had built in secret could be torn apart in a single careless moment. And yet, knowing all of this, I could never stop. Surrendering to him was never a choice I made. It was a pull, a calling, something larger than myself that I could not resist. The danger lived in the silence of our meetings. The quiet nights when the world outside kept moving, unaware that two hearts were colliding in a way that defied everything. He would arrive softly, as though the night itself conspired to cover his footsteps, and every second of waiting was agony. But when the door finally closed behind him, when his eyes locked onto mine, the risk disappeared, and all that remained was the certainty that I belonged to him. Every kiss was a stolen eternity. Time did not move the same when his mouth claimed mine, when his hands held my face like I was the only truth in his world. The danger, the fear, the possibility of ruin, all of it disappeared in those moments. His lips were warmth and fire, his touch a tether that bound me to life itself. I knew that if anyone ever discovered us, the cost would be unbearable, but still I leaned into him every time. Still I gave myself over to him as if nothing else mattered. Nights with him felt endless, though they never were. The hours slipped by in whispers and gasps, in the weight of his body pressed against mine, in the sound of his heartbeat under my hand. We lived inside those hours as though they were ours to keep, knowing well that they were stolen from a world that would never forgive us. The bed, the dim light, the quiet laughter tangled between kisses, these became the places where I was most alive, even while knowing they were fragile, temporary, and always one breath away from exposure. I told myself to be careful, to keep the boundary firm, but there was no boundary strong enough to contain what had grown between us. His touch stripped away hesitation, his voice whispered through the fear, his presence made me forget the rules that had been written long before us. Every time I thought I could pull away, one look from him dissolved my resolve. He was not just desire, he was gravity, and resisting him was like resisting the pull of the earth itself. It was not lust alone that made me surrender. It was the way he saw me, the way he understood the quiet parts of me I had long kept hidden. It was in the way he reached for my hand even in silence, the way he held me as though I were both fragile and unbreakable. In his arms, I was not invisible, not forgotten, not a shadow passing through someone else's life. I was whole, wanted, and cherished. That was the truth I could not deny, no matter the risk. The fear of being discovered never left us. Every sound outside the door, every flicker of headlights through the window, Every sudden silence in the house sent waves of panic through me. But he would steady me, his lips brushing against my temple, his hand pressing over my heart, grounding me. And somehow, that fear only deepened what we shared, because it reminded us how fragile and precious every moment together was. We lived like thieves stealing fire, and every flame we carried burned brighter, because we knew it could be extinguished at any time. The danger should have been enough to stop us. The risk should have been enough to tear us apart. But love does not bend to reason. Passion does not submit to rules. And the truth was that surrendering to him was not something I chose. It was something that overtook me, something that lived in my bones. Even when fear clawed at me, even when my mind screamed at me to end it, my heart and my body pulled me back to him, again and again. Each night together left me with the same ache, the ache of knowing it would end, that morning would come, that he would leave quietly into the shadows. But in those hours, when his hands traced the outline of my body, when his whispers curled against my neck, when our breaths became one in the dark, I was more alive than I had ever been, and that aliveness was worth every risk. Even if discovery meant ruin, even if the cost was unbearable, I knew I would always choose him, because surrendering was never really surrender at all. It was the only way to live. What began as forbidden desire was never meant to grow into something so vast, so consuming, that it would touch every part of who I was. At first, it was hunger, simple, physical, undeniable hunger. The way his eyes lingered, the way his hands hesitated before finally claiming me, the way heat bloomed beneath my skin at his every touch. It should have ended there with a fire that burned bright but burned fast. Yet with him, the flames did not fade. They deepened, softened, turned into something that stretched far beyond the body. It became a connection that rooted itself into my soul. The nights we shared were more than passion. They were moments when silence spoke louder than words, when the sound of his breath next to mine felt like a promise I had been waiting my whole life to hear. In his arms, the years of wounds, the quiet scars of neglect, the weight of loneliness I had carried so long, all of it began to heal. There was no judgment in his touch, no hesitation in his embrace. He held me as though nothing I carried made me unworthy, as though my broken pieces were treasures he wanted to keep. It would have been easier if it was just lust. Desire can be silenced, can be buried, can be replaced, but what grew between us could not be silenced. It lived in the way he listened when I spoke of dreams I thought were dead, how he reminded me that life was not over, that love was not lost. He stirred something in me that had been asleep for years, a reminder that passion was not only for the young, that tenderness was not reserved for the lucky. With him, I remembered what it felt like to be seen not only for my body, but for my soul. There were nights when we lay tangled in each other, when the heat had passed and the world was hushed. His hand would rest over my heart, steady and sure, and he would trace small circles against my skin, as if memorizing me. In those moments, I felt a stillness I had never known. It was not just pleasure that kept me there. It was the safety, the certainty, the quiet truth that he was not only taking from me, but giving back pieces of myself I thought were gone. Every secret meeting, every stolen moment, carried its share of fear, but that fear never outweighed what I felt when he looked at me. His eyes spoke a language no one else had ever spoken to me. They told me I was beautiful when I felt invisible, told me I was enough when I felt hollow, told me I was loved when I thought love no longer lived for me. That was the depth of what we shared. It was not built only on bodies pressed together in the dark, but on the kind of bond that no distance, no taboo, no judgment could break. People might have called it wrong, and perhaps on the surface they would have been right. But love does not bend to the rules written by others. Love does not ask permission to exist. What lived between us was larger than the whispers, stronger than the shadows, and deeper than the fear. I knew the risks, knew the weight of what it meant, But when I was with him, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the truth of his hands, the sound of his laughter, the way his presence steadied my soul. He reminded me of who I once was before life hardened me. He made me dream again, not of wild fantasies, but of simple things, of mornings filled with quiet comfort, of evenings lit with soft laughter, of a life where love was not an afterthought but the center. He gave me back the belief that intimacy was not a memory to mourn, but a flame still burning, waiting to be fed. With him, it was not about escape. It was not about running from loneliness or filling an empty space. It was about creation, building something new from the brokenness, weaving together two souls into a fabric stronger than either had known alone. He did not complete me, he awakened me, and in return, I gave him everything. My trust, my body, my soul. The world around us may never understand, may never accept, but love this deep cannot be undone. It exists outside of rules and beyond the reach of judgment. It is not fragile, it is not fleeting. It is carved into the very core of who I am now. What started as a desire I thought I could hide became the love that redefined me, healed me, and bound me to him in a way no force on earth could ever destroy. It was not lust alone, but a love too deep to deny. If this story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of passion and the beauty of true love, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. More stories are waiting, stories that will stir your heart, awaken your soul, and remind you that love this deep is never forgotten. Stay with us, because the next chapter may just be the one you've been waiting for.